In this video, we will dive into most popular JavaScript interview questions and coding challenges. And actually, this video is a part of my full course, JavaScript interview questions and practical tasks, where we are solving together 59 different tasks that you can meet on the interview. And these are all tasks that I saw or asked during the last 10 years. And you can find the link to the full course in the description box below. But if you just want to start and see some JavaScript challenges, let's jump right into it. There are three different types of interviews that you might get. First of all, it is theoretical part, so you are just being asked some questions regarding your working experience and so on. This is normal type of interview for more advanced developers, where they already have a lot of years of experience, because the interviewer understands, okay, this guy was working in web development, for example with JavaScript last 5 years, which actually means he has enough knowledge and it doesn't make any sense to check his programming skills. The second popular type of interview is coding interview, and actually I would say this is the most popular type of interview, and people often mix together theoretical interview with coding challenges, which actually means you are getting some theoretical questions and then you must code something, and most often you are just using pen and paper and no computer. And in this course, we will solve together 59 different JavaScript challenges that you can get, and these challenges are covering almost all JavaScript that you will meet on the interviews. And the last type of the interview is project checking interview. Typically, interviewer want to see your code, so if you have something to show, it is much easier for you, because you should not answer just random questions, but you can talk about your project, about your code, and so on, which actually means I highly recommend you for the interview to implement some project, because first of all, you will have something to show to the interviewer, and secondly, you will have something to talk about that you at least know. So typically to get a job you must pass an interview, and this is how it is working in almost all companies. But the main problem is that your interview is not always related to your work, which actually means on the interview you might be asked difficult or not real-world questions, but you must answer them to get a job, but you will never use this knowledge later in your everyday work. So here is the problem. There are some similarities between interviews and work, but actually they are different. And in the perfect world, your interview must be a mirror of your real work in the company. But unfortunately, it is not always like this. This is why you must know both. You must know how to pass the interview, and you must know how to work. And in this course, most of the challenges are completely real knowledge that you must know and that you need both in your interview and in the everyday life. But I also included in this course some questions which are really not related to your everyday programming, but you need to know them just for your interviews. The first task that we want to look at is sounding like this. You need to write a code to get an array of names from given array of users. And as you can see here, we have an array of users, and actually it is just an array of objects with ID, name, and is active property. And actually this is a relatively easy task, but it is really nice to start the interview. And experienced interviewers will know that you are on stress, which actually means you must receive several easy exercises just so you are relaxing a little bit and you can be more focused and more productive. And actually, even an easy exercise can tell interviewer quite a lot. What code style you are using, how do you name your variables, and how you are writing your code, so he can understand on what level you are and what questions he needs to ask you. So now I highly recommend you to pause this video and try to implement it by yourself. If you just want to follow along, then let's code this. And actually there are several ways to implement it. Normally beginners will start with for loop because it is the easiest approach what they know. For example, here after our users array, we can write here a for loop. So we have here for let index from 0 to user's length. So here we have I smaller than user's length, and here we have I++. Now inside our for loop we want to access every single name and push it in some new array. This is why before we want to create a new array, let's name it names and it will be an empty array. Now inside our for loop we can write names.push, and here inside we are accessing our users with I, so this is our current user, .name. In this case, we are pushing only a name of this user in this array. And after our for loop, we can just console log our new names and check it in browser. I am reloading the page, and as you can see, our result is Jack, John, Mike. This is exactly what we need to implement. And yes, we solved our task, and if you are a beginner, this solution is totally fine, but you can do better, because every single time when you write a better code on interview, you show that you are a better developer. This is why let's comment out this code and try again. So what we can use here instead of for loop is for each function for our array. This is why here we can simply write users.forEach, and inside we must provide a callback function. What is more importantly, we are getting access here to every single user. And now inside we can do whatever we want. And as you can see here, we don't have any indexes and our code is looking much better. So what we want to do here is exactly the same stuff like we did previously. We created here an array names, and now inside our for each loop we want to push inside our names our user.name. And as you can see, in comparison to our old code, this code is much easier to read. Let's uncomment here our console log and check if it's working. As you can see, we are getting exactly the same results, so this is your level 2 of writing code. But actually the best way to solve this task is to use additional map function, and actually it will make your code the simplest just because you are using the right tool for the right task. In this case here we can write that we want to get back our names array, and here we want to loop through our users with the map function. And if you don't know what map is doing, we are looping through every single element inside our array, and we return some new data for every single element. In our case, instead of our object, we want to return a single name. This is why here we can write that we have user, and we want to return here user.name. Let's check if it's working. As you can see in browser, we are getting exactly the same output. But this is the best variant for this task, and it shows that you know what you are doing. For solution is almost always low level, which means you exactly need to implement what you are doing. In this case here, we need to say that we are pushing elements to our new array names. And also what you can see here, we created names array before using for loop, which actually means our logic and our additional variable don't have anything together. In our case here, we are writing result directly to our new variable names. So you successfully solved this task, and now you are getting the next one. We need to get back only active users, which means our first point here is valid, but this must be only active users. And actually we could use any method that we want here to solve this. For example, we could use here for loop and simply write inside an if condition, and we can check here if our user is active. And if this property is true, then inside we want to push our element to our new array. And as you can see in browser, we are getting here only 2 users because our last user is inactive. This is totally fine, but we have here 2 problems. First of all, our code is low level, and secondly, we are mixing here logic together with filtering elements and mapping them. And this is bad because when your code is more complex, then it is more difficult to split it. And actually the solution with for each will be exactly the same. But let's look on the solution with map. Actually what we want to do here, we want first of all to filter our array and get only active users, and only after that we want to apply our map. So we can write here .filter, and we have exactly the same logic. We have here access to our user, and we must return here a predicate with true or false. In our case it will be user.isActive. So if our user is active, then we will leave it inside our array, in other case we will throw it away. And after this we are calling our map to map names. What is important in this code here, we are not mixing mapping and filtering together, which means it is easier to support such code. Now we have another task. You are getting sort users by age descending, and of course true first rules also applies. Which means we first of all must sort our array, and then we need to filter our array and map our names. And as you can see here now, additionally we are getting age property. This is our property by which we will sort our array. And actually in JavaScript, if you want to sort something, you must use only a single JavaScript function, and it is .sort. You can't really do it differently. If you don't know how array sort function is working, you can jump to developers Mozilla.org to this URL, and here is array prototype sort. The main idea is that we are calling sort function on our array, and inside we pass a function comparator with a and b, and in our case it will be first user and second user, and then second user and third user, which means it is comparing elements one by one, and here we must return something. As you can see inside, we can return -1 if a is less than b, then we will reorder it. Now we must return 1 if a is greater than b, and we're returning 0 if they are equal. And this is exactly what we must do here. So in all these three cases, we must write the same code. But in the first two variants, it will be kind of ugly, because actually we must do the sorting before our code here. So let's uncomment our code here, and we want to apply sorting. And here we want to write users.sort, and we are getting here our comparator. So we have here user1 and user2, and we want to compare them by age. This is why we can write here user1.age is less than user2.age. And if it is true, then here we want a ternary operator, we want to return -1, in other case we want to return 1. Let's save this and check if it's working. I'm jumping to browser, reload the page, and we're getting John and Jack. Let's check this out on the top. John is 18 and Jack is 20, which means we sorted our data correctly, but in ascending order. As you can see here, we must sort it in descending order, which means we want to swap here not -1 but 1, and here will be -1. Let's check this out. We are getting first of all Jack and then John, and this is correct sorting. Also, you must remember that sort operation in JavaScript mutates an array. This is why here we directly called sort and we didn't assign our result to some property, because it just mutates our user's array and then we are doing other stuff with it. But as you can see here, this code is really separated from our for loop because we must do it before our operations inside. Now let's comment this code and try to use it with our map and filter. And here it is much easier to do because we simply want here after our users to call .sort and after this to call filter and map. As you can see here, when I uncomment it, it is looking really pretty. We have here our users, we are doing our sorting, after this we do our filtering and then mapping. And first of all, this code is much easier to read. You have here chaining and you are getting your result in this one single property. Also, it is important that we are not mixing different operations. First we are doing sort, then filtering, then map, and if we need to adjust one of them, we don't need to change the logic of another one. Let's check if it's working. I'm reloading the page and we're getting exactly the same result. So as you can see, you can solve even a simple task in different ways. If you want to show on interview that you are an advanced developer, you must use a specific tool for your specific task. This is why the chain of sort, mapping and filter here is much better than using for loop. You might get a question like this. What will be logged in the first example and in the second example? To answer here correctly, you must understand the difference between null and undefined inside JavaScript. As you can see here, we have two examples. In first example, we didn't assign anything to our variable, which means this variable is not defined yet. This is why when here we console log this variable, it will be equal undefined. And here after this, we are console logging the type of this variable, and the name of the type will also be undefined. And here we have our second example where inside our variable 2 we assigned null value. And here we are console logging var2, and as you can understand, here we have our value null. This is what we will see on the screen. But type of variable 2 will be an object, because there is no such type as null. This is why the type of variable is an object. Let's check this out. I'm reloading the page and we're getting here undefined. This is our variable 1 here, so the value of it is undefined. The type of undefined is undefined string. Now after this we're console logging var2. Here we're getting null. This is our value, and type of variable 2 is an object. So you really must distinguish in JavaScript between null and undefined. Undefined means that the variable is declared but the value is not assigned yet inside this variable. This is exactly what we have here on line 3. And null in JavaScript is an assignment value, which means it's a value that we can assign inside a variable. In our case here we're assigning null inside variable 2. And even if you answered correctly here, interviewer might ask you, but what is really the difference between null and undefined? When we need to use null and when we need to use undefined? And actually it is a tricky one, because normally in normal languages we have only a single property, which means that the variable does not exist, for example nil. But in JavaScript we have two different things, we have undefined and we have null. And actually it really depends on your code style and your team, because you can use both of them inside project, but for example I prefer to always use only nulls and try to have as little undefined as possible. But obviously if you are trying to find a value inside array, you will get there undefined and not null, because we didn't find anything. So the answer here that it is fine to use both of them, and there is not really something better in one or another. You might be asked in the interview the question like this: what will be console logged here? And as you can see here we have console log foo and then foo equals 1. And actually this is a typical question regarding hoisting. So what hoisting error means? It means that the declaration of your variable will bubble to the top of the file. And this is how it works in JavaScript when you are using var keyword or function keyword. So the question is what we will see here. We have here console log foo, and foo is a variable, but as you can see it is not declared. And on the second line we have foo equals 1. Actually we will get here an error. Let's check this out. I'm reloading the page and we are getting foo is not defined. Why it is happening? Because yes, the first line which is executed is console log, and foo is not defined inside our file. This is why we have this error. So the correct answer here, we will get an error because foo is not defined. The main problem is here that typically you will get such answers just to answer on the paper without any usage of computer, because obviously programmers are not using computers every day. This is why you can't really test it in browser, and you need to understand how all this stuff is working beforehand. After a correct answer, you probably will be asked something like this. So the next question then will be, okay, we're console logging here foo, but after this we have var foo equals 2. And actually here is the huge difference, because in first question we had here foo equals 1, but we didn't have a creation of the variable. But here we have var2, which is actually a creation of the variable, but you might think, okay, var2 happens after console log, which means we will still get an error that foo is not defined because var2 happens later. But actually this is a wrong answer, because the main idea is that var declaration is bubbling to the top of the file, which means it is exactly the same code like writing here var foo, and here we're just assigning foo to 2. This is exactly the same code. This is how JavaScript interprets this code. This is why if we will open a browser, you can see that we are getting undefined. Why it is happening? Because actually here we have var foo, and in this case var foo is undefined because we didn't assign any value. After this we have a console log foo, we are getting undefined, and only after this we are assigning 2 inside foo, which means it won't be an error, it won't be 2, it will be undefined. And this process is called hoisting. If you answered correctly, you might get one more question regarding hoisting. As you can see here is question 3, we have here foo equals 3, then console log foo, and then var foo. And I think now you know the answer. Yes, we have here var foo, and it bubbles to the top of the file, which means actually this var foo is exactly like is written here, which means on the first line we are defining foo property, on the next line we are assigning foo to 3, and after this we are console logging foo, which means it will be equal 3. And it doesn't really matter that var foo is going at the end, it will be bubbled to the top. Let's check this out. I'm reloading the page and we're getting 3, and this is exactly what we were waiting. And you can get exactly the same question, but not with var, but with function keyword. If you have somewhere in your code function, and then the name of your function, and then inside you are writing some logic, this specific definition will bubble to the top. Which actually means it doesn't really matter in what line of your code you are writing function foo, it will be the first line that will be executed in JavaScript. Which actually means if here before I will call foo, it is totally fine. As you can see in browser, we are not getting any errors because this foo function is bubbled to the top, and it works exactly the same like var. And here is one more important thing that you must add to your answer. You must mention that we can use const and let, and we don't have any problems with them, because both const and let are not bubbling at all, which means if we write here const a equals 1, it won't bubble anywhere. If it is defined on the 17th line, then it will be existed only in 17th line, which means we don't have any problems with const and let, and the way that JavaScript interprets our code is exactly the same like code that we're seeing on the screen. So you can just say that you're using const and let in every single project, and you don't have any problem with bubbling of the variable or with hoisting. This is for sure a question that I hear on every single JavaScript interview. This is why you must understand what are closures. As you can see here, we have a task, create a counter function which has increment and get value functionality. And actually you might not get it from this task, but this is a task regarding closures, because we must create a function where inside we store some value and we have two public methods. And this is how you typically need to implement it. So we want to create our, for example, private counter function, and this is private because we're storing a counter inside which is not available outside. And actually this is just a function. But if you hear on interview that you must store something inside function after you call this function, then you have a question regarding closure. So what we want to do here, we want first to create our counter. So let's name it count, and by default it will be 0. Now we must return our public API, these two methods, increment and getValue functionality. This is why we are making here return, and inside we want to return two things. First of all, it is an increment function, and this is just a property where we are passing inside our value. And what we want to do, we want to change this count that we have on the top here. So we're writing here count plus equal, and here is our value that we want to increase. And actually it might be that we want to increase it by default just by 1. This is why it makes sense to pass here 1. In this case we can simply call increment and it will work out of the box. And the next method will be here getValue, because we want to get our count back. And actually here this is just a function which will return our count. And the main idea is that this is our public API. This is what is available inside this function after we are calling it. Let's check this out. Let's create here our counter, and we're calling here our private counter function. And actually what I want to do here, I want to console log first of all our counter dot getValue. This is our method to get our counter. And secondly, we want to call counter dot, and here is increment, to increment our value, and then counter once again to check value once again. Let's check if it's working. I'm reloading the page where I'm getting 0 and 1. But the most interesting idea what we have inside this private counter. If we're writing here private counter, you can see that this is a function. And actually we don't have any access to this property count. So this property count in this case is private. And even if I'm writing here counter, you can see that we're getting an object with two values, getValue and increment, and we don't have any access to our counter property inside. So this code is working, but it is really tricky and complex because this is a closure. What does closure ever mean? Closure means that we have access inside of a function to the outside scope, which actually means here, for example, inside increment, we're using count, and we don't have this count inside this function, we have it outside here on the top. And exactly the same regarding getValue, we have this counter here on the top, not inside this function, which actually means closure function has access to all properties inside itself and all properties which were defined before. Why it is important? Because actually with this single liner, const counter equals private counter, we're creating a closure. Because when our counter exists, we have a closure and we have this reference to this counter. This is why every single time when we are calling getValue and increment, it is working and it is referencing this count on the top. And you might say, okay, but it is sounding like magic, I don't understand how it is looking like in JavaScript. And this is where console directory can help us. If we will write inside console, not console log, but console directory, and inside I want to pass a function, in our case it is counter getValue, and I'm hitting here enter. Here we don't see a body, but instead our function is an object. And we're interested here in part which is called scopes. And this is exactly what we're interested about. After we open here scopes, we have here a property closure. And this is exactly our closure. As you can see here, we have closure, private counter, and here count equals 1, which means exactly we have this let count equals 0, and now it is inside closure. This is why it is available for us inside JavaScript. And all these questions regarding closures are exactly the same. For example, you might be asked the question, you need to create a function which will store inside secret string and will just return it when we call this function again. So it will look something like this. For example, let's create a function private secret, and here we don't pass anything inside. What we want to do inside is create our secret string. So let's just create a secret and it equals foo. So the secret is exactly our closure, and for it to be available outside we must return here a function. So we simply return here a function, and this function will return a secret. This means that when we are creating outside a function, which we can name for example getSecret, we must call here our private secret function. The main idea is that private secret function gives back a function. In this case, our getSecret is a function, and now we can console log our getSecret, and we just call it. And actually, as you can see in console, we are getting this foo string back. This is why our secret string is actually a closure, and it is available outside after we store this private secret inside additional property. In this case, we are storing this closure after our function was executed. And closure is a super popular pattern inside JavaScript. This is why you must know how to use closures. You might get a question like this. Write a function which helps to achieve multiply a and b and returns product of a and b. And as you can see here, we have this strange notation, multiply then a and b not like two arguments, but this is the first call of the function and this is the second call of the function. And actually, if you are getting such question, it means that you are going in the direction of carrying. And carrying is a special possibility in JavaScript to carry a function, and then we can call it like this. And actually here we can implement this stuff with super basic carrying. Let's try this out now. So what I want to do, I want to create multiply function, and here we are getting our a, so it will be number 1 for example, and here we want to return a function, because as you can see here on the top, we are calling on the result of multiply a, b, which means our multiply must return a function. So here we can write that we are getting a function which will get b, this is number 2 for example, and here inside we want to multiply our num1 and num2. In this case, our second function will deliver for us multiplication of number 1 and number 2. And this is how we can use it. We can write here console log. We want to call here our multiply function, and we're passing a, for example, 2, and after this we're calling b, this is our second function, and we're passing inside 3. Let's look in browser, I am reloading the page and we're getting 6, which means this code is working. And actually you can write this multiply function in better way. You can simply omit here returns, and then it will be a simple single liner. So we have here multiply function and we're getting num1 here, then we want to return here a function, and we're getting here num2, and we want to multiply our num1 multiply num2. And this is exactly the same logic, but it is written in the single liner. I will now comment out the previous code and let's check. As you can see, we're getting exactly the same result. But this is not really carrying. So if you solve such task, typically you will be asked, okay, but what did you write here? What this mean? Why we need such strange notation? And actually you must tell that we are talking here regarding carrying. The next question that you might get is create a carry function. And this is actually a difficult question, and if you didn't have any experience of carrying functions, then probably you won't answer it. This is why here we will look how we can create a carry function and why do we need them. And actually carry function is working exactly like our multiply here. So we can write in browser, for example, carry, and this is our function. We must always pass inside the function that we want to carry. In this case, we have, for example, a function with a, b, and c. So we have 3 arguments, and we want to just sum a plus b plus c. The main point is that the result of carry is a function, and let's name it carried sum. So this is how we're using carry. What we can do with carried sum later, we can write here our arguments. We have 3 arguments, how we want to. For example, we can write here 1, 2, 3, just like 3 normal arguments. We can also call it with 1, 2, and 3. Which means we are not getting a result until we are getting 3 arguments. So for example, we have only 1 argument, here 1, then it will return the partially applied function, which means we are getting back a function, and then if we will call that function and pass 2 more arguments, then we are getting enough arguments and we will return a result. And of course it should be also possible to call the function like this. So first of all we are calling it with 1, and then we are calling it with 2 and 3. And this is how normally carried function is working, and we will create it just now. So what we want to do here, we want to create a carry function, and as I said, this is more advanced stuff. And actually it is a good idea to write this function with ECMAScript 5, so with function keywords, just because we are writing something which will be used as a library. This is why here I want to write a function, and here we are getting a function. And actually here on the top, let's write our usage, so we understand what we are talking about. So we said here that we want our carried sum, and we are calling here our carry function, and inside we are passing a function with a, b, and c, and here we want to sum a, b, and c. And actually I can even write it here on the bottom after our carry, so we can test if it's working. So actually, as you can see, here is our carry function, and we're getting inside the function, this is our fn. So this abc and a plus b plus c is our function here. What we want to do now, we want to know how many arguments we have here. This is why here I want to create a property which is called arity. And here we can just write function length, and we will get the amount of arguments here. Let's check this out, console log arity, and here is our arity. I'm looking in the browser and we're getting 3, because here we have 3 arguments, a, b, and c. Now we want to return here a function, because we know that carried function is always a function. This is why here let's write function, let's name it for example f1, and here I want to spread our arguments, and let's check what we have inside. So here console log f1, and here our arguments. And actually when I reload the page, as you can see, we don't get anything, because we didn't call this carried sum. So what we must do afterwards, we must call this carried sum as a function, and we can pass inside something. In our case, we can pass 1, 2, 3. These are our 3 parameters. I'm reloading the page and we're getting here f1, 1, 2, 3. So we're getting all arguments as an array. This is our idea. And obviously we can also call this function just with 1, then we will get an array with just 1 argument. So what I want to do inside, I want to check how many arguments we got, or if we got enough arguments or not. This is why here inside return we can compare, okay, arguments length, this is the length of our array, is bigger or equal arity. And this means that we are getting enough arguments to come out of the function. So here I want to console log enough arguments. In this case, I just want to return here our function and call it with our arguments. So I'm spreading our arguments again, and it will just put here all arguments just like they were previously. Let's check this out. I'm reloading the page and we got a message enough arguments. And actually here we can console log what we are getting back. In this case, we must get our result. I'm reloading the page, we are getting 6, it is working correctly, which actually means our code already works when we are passing inside 3 arguments at once. But it won't work when we are passing less than that. This is why we must write here else condition, and inside we can write, for example, console log need more arguments. And now after this we want to return a function. As I already said, if we passed, for example, in carried just 1 argument, it must return a function where we can pass additional arguments. This is why here we must return a function, and we can name it, for example, f2, and inside we will pass more arguments. which actually means this is our first call, this is our second call. For example, here when we passed carried sum, this is also a carried function. So let's name it partially carried sum. And here we call carried sum. Now here I want to console log partially carried sum so we can check what it does. As you can see here, we inside need more arguments, and here is our function with more arguments, and actually here we want to pass inside some arguments. For example, we can pass here 2 and 3, and it will be exactly these more arguments that we wrote here. What we want to do now, we want to concatenate our arguments with more arguments to put all our arguments inside the call of the function. This is why here we can create a variable new arguments, and we want to concatenate here our arguments, and I am calling here concat, and I am passing inside more arguments. Now here we don't need to call our fn function just like we did here, but we must call our f1 function, because we want this check for enough arguments again and again, which means we are calling it recursively. This is why here I want to return f1 function, and I want to spread all our new arguments. This is why here 3 dots and new arguments. Let's check this out. I'm reloading the page. Here we are getting need more arguments and enough arguments. What does it ever mean? Here is our carried sum. We passed here one argument. We are getting in this else. This is our console log need more arguments. And here is our additional function. This is where we are calling this function, and we are passing here our more arguments. This is this variable. Now here we concatenated our 1, this is what we passed here, and to 3, and we called our f1. So we're getting here again, we have enough arguments, and here we're calling our function and we're getting 6. Now let's remove all our console logs and check how it's working. So what I want to try here is our carried sum. How we can call it? We can call it with 1, 2 and 3, and we're getting 6. It is working. Now we can call it with 1. As you can see, we're getting back a function, and we now can call it with 2 and 3. As you can see, we're getting 6 also, which means it is working. And now we can call it here with 2, and after this with 3, and we're getting 6. Which actually means it is working correctly with any amount of arguments. And if here we carried some function where we have 10 arguments, then here we are doing some operation with 10 arguments, then here we will call this function recursively until we get all needed arguments. As you can see, writing carry function is not that easy, and if you never did it before, it is difficult to write this directly in the interview, especially just on the piece of paper. And the last question that you might get here, okay, but why do we need carry function, and what your carry function can do? This is why here we want now to use our carry function on our real project. And what we can do here, we can carry two functions, get and map. Let's try this out. I want to create a get function and I want to carry it. This is why I am calling this carry function, and inside I am passing a function with two properties. First of all, it will be property, and secondly, it will be an object. And what we want to return here, we just want to take an object by a key, and it will be property. Let's check how it works. As you can see here, we have our get, and here we are passing two arguments. First of all, property, for example, ID, and secondly, our object, for example, ID1. In this case, we are getting 1 back. What we can do here, we can now, because it's carried, just call it with one argument, just with ID. And as you can see, we are getting back a carried function. Now we can store it somewhere and reuse. For example, we can create here additional function get ID, and we are calling here get with just property ID. And now, as you can see in browser, we can use getID function everywhere across our application on any object to get a property ID from it. Now we can do exactly the same with map. For example, here I want to create map and I want to carry a map function. So here we are getting a function which is an argument of the map and values which is an array. And here I want just to call a plain JavaScript values.map and I'm passing our function inside. But now our map is carried, which means we can use it everywhere like carried map. For example, we can pass inside our map get ID, and now here as a second argument we can pass an array and just have here ID equals 1. As you can see here, we directly got an array of IDs with the help of the map. And actually here we pass two arguments, but we can also carry it. For example, we can name a function here, const get IDs, and here we want to call our map on get ID. In this case, we have a partially applied function get IDs, and we can use it to get IDs from any array. For example, here we're writing getIDs, and we're calling this function on the array with objects inside, and we have here ID1. And as you can see, it is working. And this is exactly the need of the Karin to write JavaScript in functional way. And yes, this is quite advanced topic. This is why it is completely fine if you don't know this topic as a beginner. But at least you must have some basic understanding what is Karin and why do you need it at all. You might get a question like this in an interview regarding adding elements to the array. As you can see here, we must write a function which gets an array and an element and returns an array with this element at the end. And actually it sounds really easy, but you can solve it in different ways. This is why you must solve it correctly and at least tell interviewer the correct way. So typically beginners will use here array push, and then we're building something like this. So we have a function, for example append, and we're getting two arguments, our array and our new element. And what we're doing here, we're using array push, and we're passing inside our L, and after this we're returning this new array. Then we just write here console log append, and here we're checking, okay, for example, we have our array 1, 2, and here our third element 3. Now let's check if it's working. We're reloading the page and we're getting 1, 2, 3, and you think that you built this function correctly. But here is the problem. Actually, I want to write here our array. So let's name it, for example, numbers, and we have inside 1 and 2. And now here inside append, I want to just pass our numbers. But after this, I want to console log numbers. We're reloading the page and we're getting 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. What does it mean? We have this append function and we're returning here the array. And most people will think that when we're using this function, we're creating new array. This is why normally they might write new numbers, and here we're calling our append function. And we think, okay, we didn't modify our old array, but we just get new numbers because append function returns for us an array. But as you can see, these two arrays are completely equal, because actually array push modifies the old array and it doesn't create a new array. And this is typically a good example of bad code in your application. Why is that? Just imagine you have one part of your application and you have there this numbers array. Then at some point you're calling this append function to get new numbers. But then out of the blue you modified your old numbers array, which you didn't intend to do. This is why you think that in your application some magic can happen, just because the calling of this function modifies some data outside of this function. This is a bad approach. How we can fix it and make it better? We should not use here array push, it is not safe. What we want to use here instead, for example, spread operator. We can write here that we want to return a new array, and we want to spread all elements of our array that we are getting as an argument. And if you don't know what is spread, this is an ECMAScript 6 operator, these are 3 dots, and what we're doing here, we're spreading all elements of this array inside our new array, which essentially means that we're creating a copy of this array. Now we want to add this element at the end of our new array. This is why we just write comma element. Let's check this out now. I'm reloading the page and here we're getting another response. We're getting here 1, 2, 3 and here 1, 2, which actually means this single line will return for us new array, and our function is completely safe because we're not modifying any data outside of this function. This is why this implementation is much better if you are asked even something that trivial like pushing elements to the array. Also, we have exactly the same behavior with objects. If we are passing inside our function an object and we mutate it there, then we are mutating object outside of our function. And this is bad. And you can also use spread with an object to create a new object. In this case, we are on the safe side. And if you didn't know, this function like here is called pure, because first of all, this function will return the same result every single time when we are calling it with the same arguments. And secondly, it doesn't modify any variables outside of our function. This is why this is safe, pure function. We already talked about adding elements to the array and why push is not always the best approach, but you might also have a similar question. For example, here we have a task, write a function which will concatenate two arrays. and actually you might use here push and it will be wrong answer. This is why here you can actually write a function merge arrays, and here we're getting two arrays, for example array 1 and array 2, and here you might write array 1 push, and here you use spread of array 2. And after this you can just return array 1. And actually not a lot of people will write code like this, because here you are using push and then you are spreading array 2, but you might think about such approach. Now to see the problem we must create first of all our result, and here inside result we need to use two arrays. Array 1, for example, it will be just 1, and our array 2 here will be, for example, 2 and 3. And now we want to call our merge arrays and pass inside first of all array 1 and secondly array 2. And let's check in console log what we are getting. So first of all result, then array 1 and array 2. I'm reloading the page and we're getting 1 to 3, 1 to 3 to 3. This is exactly the problem like it was in previous video. Push mutates array. This is why here we're changing array 1, even if we don't want to change it. This is why push in this case is not the best approach. What we can use here instead is either array concat, which is all the approach of JavaScript, or just a spread operator just like we did previously. So instead of this return and array push, we can write here first of all array 1 dot concat, and we have concatenate function on the array, and here we're spreading our array 2. Let's check this out. We're reloading the page. Here is our result 1 to 3, and here array 1 1 and array 2 to 3. And this is exactly the correct approach because concatenate does not mutate an array. In this case it will return for us a new array. This is why everything is fine. If you don't want to use array concat, you can always just use a spread operator. So here we will use array 1 as a spread, and here we are spreading array 2. And actually the result will be exactly the same, we're getting 1 to 3. And actually I really like this approach because it is more flexible and you can merge not only arrays, but also objects, you can add new elements here, and it is more modern. If you, for example, have a question to concatenate 3 arrays or more, it is also possible. Actually, even array concat can work with several arrays. As you can see here inside documentation, here we have 3 different arrays, and you can write first array.concat, and then you have second array and third array. And actually it will work correctly. But actually you can do exactly the same with spread. Here you are spreading array 1, then array 2, and here array 3 if you need to. So both variants are possible. You might get a question, check that user with such name exists in array of object. Obviously it can be not name or not user, but the idea is that you need to check a property of the object inside an array. And actually there are different ways to implement this, and the worst way possible is by using for loop. Because as I said previously, for loop is super low level and it is not a right tool for this specific task. So let's look how it looks like with for loop. So here we want to create a function, for example isNameExists, and here we must pass 2 arguments. First of all it's a name, and secondly it is an array of our users. Now inside we must create a property which will be boolean, and it will show us that we have this user inside an array. So here we can make a let exists, and by default it will be false. Now we must write a for loop, so here we have our let I from 0 and I less than user's length, and here we are making I++. Now what we want to do inside, for every single element we must check its name. This is why here we are checking users I.name equals our name, and if it equals, then we want to assign inside exist true. After our for loop we want to return our exist property. So yes, this code will work, let's check this out, but it is super low level. As you can see, we have, for example, name John. Let's write here John and here comma our users. As you can see, we're getting true because we have such user with such name inside array. If I'm writing here just foo, we're getting false. But the problem with this code, it won't show that you are an advanced developer. This is why I want to show you 3 other possibilities to write this code, and actually all these 3 possibilities are okayish. My favorite will be a single liner here, so we can create a function isNameExists, and here we're getting name and array. And as you can see here, I didn't write users but array, because now we can use this function on any data. And now what I want to call here is array.sum. And if you don't know what sum is doing, you can call sum on array and give inside some predicate. So you want to check something inside. In our case, sum will return us true if we have at least one single element which fulfills our condition. So inside sum we can write element, and we want to check here element name equals our name that we passed inside. And this is literally the same code like we wrote here, but much smaller. Let's check this out. I'm reloading page and I'm just typing isName exists. As you can see, we're getting true. So actually sum is the best solution to this question, but it is also possible to use other solutions. So let's comment this out and try again. We have here again two arguments, name and array. Now inside we can try and find element with such name. This is why here let's create an element, and we're using here array.find. We're getting our element, and here we want to check element.name equals our name from the top. But in this case, our element is actually an object. It's not a boolean. This is why here we must wrap our element in boolean to return boolean and not an object. In this case, it will work correctly. I'm reloading the page. As you can see, it is working exactly like this. So the main difference is that we must write a little bit more code because we must convert it to boolean. And the last thing that we can use here is actually not find but find index. And if you don't know what find index is doing, is exactly the same logic, but we are finding the index of this element. So if we can find the object with such name inside our array, so here we are not getting our element but an index. And after this we know that if this index is less than 0, then this item was not found. So here we can write return index bigger than 0. In this case we know, okay, it is bigger than 0, we have this element inside array. And as you can see, this code is working exactly the same. So my approach would be sum, the next approach will be find index. Find is also okay, but you should not use for loop because it is highly inefficient for such task. You might also get a task like this: remove all duplicates in the array. Which basically means if you have an array of numbers and you have, for example, 1, 1, 2, you need to leave only 1 and 2. I see here 3 different ways to solve our problem. Let's try with the best solution. For example, we can create here a function unique array, and we are getting here our array to remove all duplicates. And here what we want to do, we want to return a new array, and we want to spread inside new set, and we are passing inside array. If you don't know what set in JavaScript is, it's an object which allows you to store unique values of any type. This means that if we're writing here new set and we're passing inside our array, for example 1, 1, 2, we're hitting enter, as you can see we have the set only from 1 and 2, because inside our set elements can't be duplicated. This is why, as you can see, if we will spread our new set and put it in the new array to convert set back to array, we will get our unique elements. And actually not a lot of people know about this solution, but this is the best solution because it is first of all a single liner, secondly it is really performant. If you don't know this solution, it's not bad, you can always build this logic on your own. The most important part that even for loop here, if you're using for each for array, is not that bad. Let's check this out. For example, we have here the same function, unique array, and we want to write here a loop. And of course we need to store our result in additional property. So let's make here result, which will be our unique array. Now here I want to loop through every single element of our array with for each function. And here we are getting our item as every element of our array. Now what we want to check here if we already have this item inside our result. So we can check here result.includes, and if you don't know includes, check if we have this element inside an array. And we want to pass inside our item. So this will return true if it includes, but actually we must put here bang to have a negation. And if it does not include this element inside the array, then we want to push it to our result. So result push, and here is the item. So as you can see, even for each loop here is not that bad, because it is isolated inside our function. We're simply looping through every single element and we're pushing our result directly in the new array. And of course at the end we must return our result. So here let's return the result and check if it's working. So here is our function unique array 1, 1, 2, and as you can see we're getting 1 and 2 back. But obviously our function won't work with objects or arrays inside, and this is completely normal. So if you have here an object with a equals 1, and here you have one more object with a equals 1, as you can see we're getting 2 elements, and this is totally fine, because this is 2 different objects and we can't compare them. And actually we can rewrite this for each by using reduce. In this way we will write exactly the same code, but in the more functional way. So here let's create our function unique array. We're getting here our array, and we want directly to return array reduce. And here inside we must pass our function with accumulator and every single element. So here we have a function, and as a default argument we have here empty array. Exactly like we had here where we wrote const result equals empty array. Now what we want to do inside, we want to check our accumulator includes, so we are checking our result if we have in this resulted array our element. So if we have it, then we simply return accumulator, so we don't change anything. In other case, we want to push this element to accumulator, and we are not using array push, but we are using spread. So here I am spreading accumulator, and at the end I am adding our element. In this way, this code is completely functional, it is easy to understand, and we don't have this nasty push here. Let's reload the page and check if it's working. As you can see, it still doesn't work with objects, which is totally fine, and it works with primitives because here one was removed from our array. So as you can see, you have 3 different variants to implement uniqueness in array. And actually all these 3 variants are completely fine to show on the interview. We already had a certain exercise when we mapped our users in one of previous videos. But here I want to talk about sorting a little bit deeper. As you can see, you can get a question, sort the array of numbers. Which actually means we have an array, for example 3, 5, 1, and we must sort it. And for this we are using sorting function in JavaScript, so we simply write sort, and here we must pass a sortable function, and we have such conditions. When a less than b, we are returning here -1, if a greater than b then 1, and 0 if they are equal. And previously we wrote here a and b, and here we can write a smaller than b, then we are returning -1, in other case we are returning 1. Also, it is important to remember that sorting returns the result of the sorting, which means we can put it in variable, for example result, but it will also mutate our array that we created. And actually it doesn't really make sense here because this is generated array on the fly, but if we will put it in the variable, then it makes sense. Here we have our array, and here we are sorting it. Let's look at the example. I'm console logging here array and result. And as you can see in browser, here we are getting exactly the same sorted array. And this is happening because sort mutates existing array, and we must remember about it. Also, there is one more important point to remember. In compare function, we can return a number which is bigger than 0 and smaller than 0. And it will be exactly the same. It will sort b before a and sort a before b, which actually means we can write our code a little bit differently and not with -1 and 1. We can simply return here a minus b. Why is that? Because we have here 2 numbers, for example 3 minus 5. In this case it will be less than 0, and then we will have this condition sort a before b. Let's check this out. I'm reloading the page. We are getting 135 as previously. If we will write here b minus a, then it will be sorted in other direction. As you can see, we are getting 531, which actually means for sorting, we can sort it by returning -1 and 1, or something less than 0 and bigger than 0. Also, it is important to remember that we can use sorting only with primitives. If you are trying to sort here an object, it won't do anything because you can't really compare objects. But you can sort properties inside objects. And we have a task to sort an array of our books by author's last name. And here we can use exactly the same sorting function. So we're writing here books.sort, and here we're getting as an argument book 1 and book 2, and now we must compare them properly. So first of all, we must find a last name of the first author and of the second author. So here let's write author, last name 1, and here we're taking our book 1 dot author, and here we want to split our name with space and get here first argument. In this case, we will get a last name of our author. Now I will copy paste this line, and here we have author last name 2, and here is book 2. And now after this we can compare these two strings. This is why here we can write author last name 1 smaller than author last name 2, then we want to return -1, in other case we will return 1. And actually, as you can see here, we must use -1 and 1 because it's not numbers. We can't really subtract strings. And as you can see here in browser, we didn't console log anything. Now let's console log our books because actually we mutated our array. Let's reload the page, and as you can see, these are our books, but now on the first place we have Susan Collins. As you can see, it is sorted because previously we had here Rowling, then Mary Lou, and then Joanne Rowling, which actually means this code is working, and this is how you are sorting array of objects by some property. A lot of people, especially beginners, do not understand the purpose of interview correctly. They think that they must come to the interview, answer a bunch of questions, and get a job. And it is not like this at all, because interview is actually a communication between several people, where every side wants to clarify some questions regarding other person. For example, if we are talking about interviewer, he is interested in your knowledge and obviously how you will fit in his team. So it is not just about answering questions, it is more like ping pong. You are asking a question and interviewer asking a questions. It should not be like only interviewer asking a questions and you simply answer. Because in this case, first of all, you can't get answers on your questions, and secondly, you are not showing that you are interested in this company or in this specific position. So when you are talking with tech guy and especially with HR, you must show that you are interested. You must ask some questions about company, about the team, how many working days you have, do you have overtimes here, how often people are leaving the company, how long people typically work in the company, and so on. Because first of all, you want to know what are working conditions in this company, and not just get in some company with bad working conditions. And obviously I can understand that if it is your first job, you want to go anywhere, you simply want to start working. And I totally understand that. But if you don't want to suffer later, it makes a lot of sense to ask these questions. Also, you must like team lead or interviewer, and typically it will be your future boss, because you will work a lot with this person. And it goes the same with the team. It is really a nice idea to meet the whole team, at least to check what is the mood inside this team, are people friendly to each other, are they happy with working conditions, and so on. And the same I can say about checking the office. It is really weird sometimes when you are not allowed to see the whole office, because this will be a place where you will be working, and you must be satisfied with working conditions. So I highly recommend you to ask for the short tour in the office, so you can at least see the working conditions, do you have enough light there, what monitors you have, and so on. And this was the end of the first chapter. If you want to learn JavaScript interview questions even deeper, don't forget to check a link in the description box below.